Holy cow, it's the classic movies screening discussion. It is time. The No Name Cinema Society evening continues with our classic discussion, our most popular show of the evening. We do 4 segments per evening. We'll talk about that in a second. I'm Jonathan Betzler, one of your hosts for the No Name Cinema Society. I'm here in Los Angeles. It was supposed to be in New York, but I got a job on a feature. I'm working on a feature called Little Rituals. I'll talk about that more during the sound-off if you all like. Right now, it's a classic movie discussion time, and it's time to talk about Cleopatra from 1963, going back. Before I go on with that, let me talk to you guys about the evening schedule. This is what we've done so far tonight. So at 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific, we talked about Star Trek Beyond, the current feature, the new release, if you will. R&E Spotlight at 8:30, 5:30 was Tyrannosaur. So that video is fully up and available for you guys to look at that. And right now, it's Cleopatra. That's a discussion coming up very shortly, a full-hour discussion of the classic film from 1963. We'll dig into that. And a sound-off, our freeform segment, I'm going to have a 1990 film as part of our second run. I'm going to do a top 5. British Indies is my top 5 for the evening based on our discussion of Tyrannosaur. And Davey has a new/old segment coming up in the sound-off tonight. And he's been looking forward to that one for a long time. With that in mind, I think it's time for me to introduce my co-host, who gets to go first, our own Julius Caesar, J Money.
I could have gone either way. Davy Joe, he's really the one with the power.
Between the two of you, which one of you is more likely to be assassinated on the 15th of March? It would be you.
You think so? Okay, I'll take that. I thought I was more of a Cleopatra myself. I'm the one with the cleavage. No.
Everyone knows that I'm the real Cleopatra. Our other co-host is Mark Anthony, our handsome, devilish, brooding David Joseph.
That is me. That is me. Thank you.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. All right, so it's time. So those are my co-hosts. We're going to jump right into discussion. But first, I'm going to tell you about the trivia of the evening. This movie was the highest-grossing film of 1963, even though it was considered to be one of the biggest box office bombs of all time. It actually was the highest-grossing film of the year, got nominated for a Best Picture, won 3 Oscars, and but it did nearly bankrupt its studio because even though it made so much money, they spent so much on it, largely due to the demands and issues involving star Elizabeth Taylor. Maybe we'll unpack that. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll just talk about the movie itself, not necessarily around some of the fringe things. We'll see what the guys have to say about that. But I guess that should lead to my summary. So let me pick up a fun photo for the summary. I'm going to go with this one. And excuse me, this is what happens when you work 100-hour weeks, 3 weeks in a row. All right, summary time. So our girl here, this is Cleopatra, played by Elizabeth Taylor. Caesar arrives in Egypt on a political mission to chase down his rival Pompey, and in so doing is entranced with the beauty and intelligence of this lovely POA, Cleopatra, sister to the pharaoh. She manipulates Caesar to help her take back her throne, which they do successfully. Once Cleopatra is queen of Egypt, she bears Caesar a son that won't get to know his father very well, because once the Ides of March pass and Caesar is murdered, Mark Antony enters the picture, needing supplies from Egypt, and Egypt now a province of the Roman Empire. Despite their disagreements, Antony and Cleopatra cannot deny their attraction to one another. The rest, as they say, is history. I wanted to be done this section by 6:08 Pacific. It is now 6:08 Pacific, which leads me to opening thoughts, which leads me to Davy Joe.
I'd say that this movie is sort of unrelentingly mediocre.
Unrelentingly mediocre. So would that go in this category?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
There we go.
Put it up.
Nice.
I had a feeling that might happen here. It is, and in fairness to Davy Joe, it is 2 hours and it is 251 minutes. I think I got that right. I might be off by a minute or two. But hey, once you go over 4, who cares? You know, what's the, you know, who's what, you know, like it's you're past the point at that point. J Money, opening thoughts.
Yeah, I guess to echo Davy Joe, it's a really long movie. That's pretty much the big takeaway. It's a really long movie.
Okay, I mean, sure. And I screened this in December of last year, December 2015. So it's been a while. And yeah, the group was restless. You know, they're, you know, in fairness, 60s audiences were somewhat more used to seeing long movies, maybe not over 4 hours. But the movie it goes up against is another 60s movie that's also 4 hours long, and we'll talk about in the brackets.
It's only 3 hours long.
It's 3?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And because it was so long, I have to admit the discussion was pretty minimal. It's been a long time since I myself had seen it, but one thing it wasn't my first time, but one thing I've always felt about it is I don't think it's that bad. I, for one, love the political intrigue of it, and I say not that bad based on its place in history. You know, it's sort of considered this big bust, historically speaking, but I think it's fascinating in many ways. I love the political intrigue. I love one performance in particular. Love the design elements. Several of them won Oscars, and that's maybe where we should start. You know, guys, at least you have to acknowledge the design elements in this movie were pretty outstanding. Can you at least give me that?
Yeah, I mean, there was a certain point where I was pretty much only in it for the costume changes. I mean, certainly the production design and also Liz Taylor's whole wardrobe were pretty amazing, just in general. And also amazing just in terms of assessing 4 hours of it. I mean, there's a huge amount of stuff in this movie, and it's no wonder they almost broke the bank on making this production, because it's insane. It's insane to think of how they could have produced everything that they did. And also, I mean, I don't think we want to get too much into this, but the fact that they had to do it twice, am I correct, JB?
They didn't have to do everything twice, but they had to do several things over.
Well, didn't they have to build a large part of the set over again?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that's insane in and of itself. But that is a big thing to take away from this film, certainly. That's a very admirable part of it. That's something that's very lasting about it, and the thing that probably a lot of people remember most from it in terms of how it's created a certain amount of iconic imagery.
And yeah, and it's certainly it's opulent, and it feels appropriate for the movie. I think it's fair to say. I don't think it feels like opulent for opulent's sake.
No, it feels appropriate for what they're trying to accomplish. I mean, they're talking about a very opulent, figure in history to begin with, but also they're trying to make sure that we understand the excess of what they're going for and how that plays into their vices, in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point. David Joe, can you at least acknowledge the quality of this work?
Yeah, I can say that the sets are very impressive, and there were some shots that I was impressed with as well, and I really liked.
Okay, I guess that's all he's got.
I mean,
I thought I was expecting more, but
All right, well, I can.
No, I'm good. I'm good. So yeah. So we all agree about the design elements, which is not a small part of the process. And the scope of it, like you said, 4 hours worth of that stuff. And one thing that we should acknowledge too is that it's all practical. Like today, if they tried to remake it, so much of it would be digital and not handmade the way that these things were. So, like props to some, no pun intended.
props guys.
Props to those people. So let's talk about the screenplay itself. There's a lot of ground to cover, and even within the 4 hours, it felt sort of rushed and consolidated. Am I wrong?
You are wrong.
Oh.
Okay.
I mean, go ahead, David Joe.
No, it's just, it's so it's slow, but it's just not interesting enough to warrant it.
So not even the political intrigue, like the cat and mouse game between The Pharaoh and Cleopatra and Caesar, all that stuff.
I mean, part of what takes me out of that the political intrigue is how awful the performances are around all of that. I thought Julius Caesar was okay, and everyone else, without exception, was unwatchable. So I mean, the story. There comes a point when it just mars the story, and you're just kind of. It's so slow and it's so brutal that it ceases to be interesting.
I think
There's that word again, brutal. I will. I sort of disagree with you on something. So, but let's get to performances in a second.
Well, can I just say that I kind of split the difference between the two of you? I mean, I think that I totally agree with you, JB, that the subject matter itself is epic and it's actually really fascinating. I just think that the way they handled it happened to stretch it out in a way that was unnecessarily drawn out.
Yeah, it feels like maybe the thing to do, and this happens sometimes with these. I guess this is considered a biopic, but even in and of itself, it's a slice of her life. It starts when Caesar enters.
Yeah.
But it feels like it needed to narrow its focus to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know, but I mean, and I think that first half, like the Caesar Cleopatra part, was enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I feel like where I really started to get lost in the movie is Antony.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. If they had been the story of Cleopatra and Caesar alone, I would have, I think, liked it a lot more.
Yeah,
I would have hated it much less had that been the case.
Wow.
What did you say, Davey?
I would have hated it much less if that were the case. You're right. It would be a much better film.
Interesting. Well, yeah, and so that's part of it. And I mean, one of the reasons why I liked the first half is I did think the performances were better there. So let's open up this can of worms. I think Rex Harrison is outstanding. Now you said he was okay, so maybe on the if we're grading on a scale, then we're agreeing. But I thought he was actually outstanding, and he went like a real. He was like the real actor amongst everything else going on. And when we lost him in the movie, that's when I really felt the movie started to get muddled.
I'll give you two points where I thought he was not so good. First, when he's stricken with whatever disease that was supposed to be awful. I mean, it just kind of lays there. It's kind of fall. It was just he didn't seem sick. He seemed fine, except it was terrible.
Epilepsy.
And he did not die very well. I mean, he got stabbed like 1,000,000 times. I would think that would hurt. It didn't look like it did, though.
I just want to say, my audience, let's not use Davy Joe as a barometer on performances.
Like Davy Joe's criticisms are that he wasn't in pain in the right way and he didn't die quick enough, basically.
No. Wouldn't it hurt to get stabbed? Am I wrong? Shouldn't that?
Well, I mean, honestly, and that sort of thing, though, is more of a direction thing too. You know what I mean? That's not necessarily a specific.
No, I'm willing to agree with that. Yes, that's.
He's willing. He's not going to agree to it, but he's willing to.
I mean, it's a very romanticized idea of what actually happened, but I think that it probably plays well into the whole sense of romanticizing the story that they did in general. I don't know if you can really fault the movie for not necessarily being so realistic in its depiction of violence and living in those conditions.
No, but I mean,
especially a '60s movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A movie pre-19.
I think that you can show pain, though. I mean, you can like some sort of I don't know, ow, I got stabbed.
I mean, I watched it in December, but didn't the camera just sort of pan off and go to Pompeii's, wasn't there Pompeii's a memorial or something behind him or something?
Yeah.
And actually, I want to hopefully after J Money gets a chance to talk about the performance, I do have a question for you.
Okay, J Money, Rex Harrison.
He was fine. I guess again I'm going to fall between the two of you guys. he felt very stagey to me, and that's okay because he's a classical actor and he's doing his thing, and he's playing a character that is very large and very classical in its own sense. So I don't I don't necessarily have a problem with the depiction. It's not like it's a very humanistic approach. It's not like it's a very natural approach, but whatever. That's I'm not going to fault him for that. It's a certain style
He's a
of
stage actor doing anything. Well, I do feel like he was. He stood out to me amongst everyone, and it sounds like we're agreeing on that.
Yeah, he seemed the most professional of the three of them by far. Yeah.
And I agree that he's
and
the
there's
best.
a fourth one that I want to talk about. But David Joe, is your question performance related?
No, you know what? We'll get to it later. It'll make more
All right,
sense.
let me just finish with the performances here because we have to. This is her movie. Like this was her thing. We have to talk about Liz. And Elizabeth Taylor's an actress I admire. She's a 2-time Oscar winner. We're going to talk about her a lot when we dig into 1966. I think we're doing our big 1966 year in review next February, and we're going to talk about a lot of movies from that year, and probably one of the greatest performances of all time, one top 10 maybe. She's going to give in 1966. So, but here in Cleopatra now, I mean, I singled out Rex Harrison, but I don't think Liz Taylor is bad. It sounds like you do, Davy Joe.
Yeah, no, I do. I think she's bad, but I don't. I think that you made a good point that a lot of it could be direction. I don't.
Well, let's not pretend that Liz Taylor took direction. Okay.
That's fair. That's fair, but she is a great actress. It's just not in this.
So I'm almost afraid to ask what you think was missing.
You know what? She didn't come across genuine to me. Her emotions definitely didn't seem they didn't seem real to me. I didn't.
I mean, I loved her. The moments that I liked her is the moments when I felt like she was being manipulative and clever and political, like that. The half of the movie that I like. The more romantic and melodramatic elements. Again, I feel like that's a script direction issue. Like I feel like the film takes a sharp turn when Caesar's out, and I feel like so the downgrade in her performance is I'm feeling is directly related to the change in the story elements. Even though you would think that since she was romantically linked to Richard Burton in real life that there would be some chemistry there, but I didn't see it in this one. I mean, like they did so many movies together, including the one in 1966 that we're going to talk about, and they do have chemistry together in some of these other movies. But I didn't feel like this was one of them. Jamie Money?
Yeah, I think that more than anything else in this movie, Liz Taylor is compelling to watch. I don't know if she has the best performance in general. I think that she can be clever and fun, and she's just it's hard to take your eyes off her. I mean, it's amazing that she really is, in and of herself, the three greatest stars of this movie. There's Liz Taylor and her chest, they're both pretty much the things that I think we're being focused on primarily throughout the entire 4 hours. She just draws an attention in a way, but her character, and I don't know, I'll maybe fault the script for this. Everybody's characters were fairly straightforward. They were all pretty much on the same line. There really wasn't much of an arc outside of the tragic events that happened to them. They're all just kind of power hungry. They're all a little conniving. There's some romance here and there, but ultimately they're not realistic. They're not human. They're just kind of compelling. They're just kind of like fascinating to watch.
I agree, and I do want to say I'm proud of you both for making it through the 4 hours without fast forwarding at all.
Well, I mean, it's. Well, I'm not gonna lie. I had a drinking game going while watching it, and that probably helped a little bit.
Did you watch it with other people?
I did. I dragged some of the people into the process because I said, let's turn this into a drinking game. And we drank every time Liz Taylor fluttered her eyes. We drank every time there was fanfare. We drank every time somebody drank. We drank every time somebody hailed Caesar. I mean, there was a lot of little things. And after 4 hours of that, you get pretty drunk. Yeah.
Now, were you expecting to hate this movie, and that's why you created a drinking game?
No, I expected it would be kind of a hike one way or the other. I didn't expect to hate it, and frankly, I didn't hate it. I think this is an okay movie. I don't think it's a bad movie at all. I just think it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, and you know what? I would say I would agree with that assessment. I mean, like what I'm always saying about it is it's not that bad, and there's many things that I find very compelling about it. But one of the things about the second half that I find extremely frustrating about it, like Richard Burton is like I could live
Oh my God.
with or without. I mean, in this movie, like he's an actor that has had some great performances in his career and had some very strange misses over the course of his career.
He's like a drunk side of beef. I mean, he's just kind of like filling the screen in a drunky way. It's kind of crazy.
But an actor that was like seriously bad and grating to me, Grating, is Octavian here.
Right.
The eventual villain, and he's the lowest of the low as far as I'm concerned, gentlemen.
I mean,
yes, yeah, you're right. You're right. The part where he yells at the guy for saying that Mark Anthony's dead, it's just, oh my God. I mean, I feel like I could not have done that any worse. It was just.
And that's saying something because Davey is pretty awful. And just watch 10 more minutes and watch how he reads the bracket rules, and you'll know.
Yeah, that's right.
I thought he was sort of like over the top in a creepy way, which seemed inappropriate for his character in a historical sense. I mean, you can say what you want about Octavian in this movie, but like he's actually kind of one of the best rulers of Rome. You know, he sort of sets up a whole 200 years of peace thing after this whole downfall.
No, I know, which is why it's interesting he's played so
weirdly
by Roddy McDowall.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of a weird. To me, I think because of that, it felt like a really weird interpretation, and I don't know whose fault that was. I don't know if that was Roddy's fault or the director or the script in general or whatever.
Well,
but
also, I mean, like, there's something almost offensive too about the sort of. I mean, like the sort of femininity that he played the character with. You know, like as if like there needs to be like some sort of questionable sexuality about the villain in this case, you know?
Yeah, I see that, definitely.
So I didn't really dig that either. Let's talk a little bit about Joseph L. Mankiewicz. Let's talk about direction. You know, like, and this is a guy, one of the 3 directors to win back-to-back Oscars, including John Ford for last week's Grapes of Wrath. He won his first of 2. Joseph Mankiewicz won in 1949 for Letter to Three Wives, and in 1950 for All About Eve. So this is a guy that knows his stuff. By the way, that was a little tidbit for you guys. That was your little tidbit, you know. So mixing in tidbits in the middle of the show now. And incidentally, the 3rd person to have won back-to-back Oscars happened this very year when Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu won his 2nd in a row for Revenant after winning for Birdman the year before. So that's only the 3rd time it happened. But anyway, Mankiewicz, in this movie, what is he bringing to the table as a director? Like, what about his choices are you, like, what are you thinking in terms of his work in this movie? Obviously, it's a big challenge with all the extra, politics and drama behind the scenes. What choices is he making that's serving or this movie or not?
I guess just in a really large sense, it's impressive that somebody could competently pull it all together, especially over the period of time that they shot everything. I mean, I guess I feel like I can't tell you how his skills specifically added to this movie because it's really hard to. It's from my point of view really hard to assess that after going through 4 hours of it. You know, it's almost like you can't see the details after a certain part. You just kind of like go along with the flow of it. But I mean,
yeah,
it's a huge undertaking, and the fact that it was coherent ultimately is commendable in and of itself in a way.
Yeah, David Joe, do you got anything on direction?
I mean, there were a couple things that I kind of wrote down. There were a couple shots that I liked a lot. One where she's, they're standing. It's at nighttime and there's a fire in the background and I think it was the library was burning down and they have on one side they have the statue and off and on the right is in the distance is the fire, and I think it was smart. It was nice that he didn't just pan from their faces to the fire, which I think a lot of directors would have done.
Mm.
So that was one thing that really kind of stuck out to me, and there were a lot of instances where there were shots like that that I thought were really smart. Obviously, he's a tremendous director, and All About Eve is a great movie too. So I don't.
Well, I mean, one of the things about All About Eve and Letter to Three Wives that stands out to me is the sharpness of the dialogue, and he also wrote the script, so I didn't necessarily feel like that was present here. But then again, unlike those two movies took place in modern times, at least the present for the people that were making them, So this is a historical thing, and all of a sudden it felt like you took his best weapon away from him.
Yeah, I certainly don't feel like the dialogue in and of itself stuck out. I mean, especially compared to other movies we've seen that have touched on royalty and sort of large ensemble casts.
That's a Lion and Winter reference, ladies and gentlemen, episode 27.3.
Very nice. I mean, that's like I think our base standard for assessing this kind of epic at this point.
Except that this is twice the length. And
sure.
I do want to say, in fairness, I mean, like, so maybe there was a decision of Mankiewicz to try and cover so much ground that is questionable. So that's part of it. I was thinking about some of the battle scenes, and like I just felt like we were sitting there watching the battle scenes from afar in a very awkward way.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily understand that, and it felt, given all that they spent on this movie, to deny us the battle scene seems strange.
Right. Well, it's interesting because in a sense the battle scenes didn't really have. To me, it's like he spent all his effort with the pomp and circumstance of sort of like ceremony.
Yeah.
And the battle scenes were actually kind of fell to the wayside. I mean, you can't fault him for what he did. The scene where Cleopatra comes into Rome is amazing. It's literally an amazing scene. It's amazing.
I just showed a picture of it. It's impressive.
Everything in that scene is perfect to me. Everything from how they wrangled the extras to the I guess you could say the blocking of how everything worked, the props themselves. I mean, she's on this amazingly weighted platform. I don't know if you noticed that when they brought her down, that her platform stayed straight as they actually brought her down. Like the engineering involved and all the production stuff on that was amazing, and the way that he actually pulled it together was really well done, I thought. So that was his battle scene. Those kind of scenes were the things where he kind of were the payoff, as opposed to the battle scenes themselves, which were just kind of like rote and not really that interesting to watch.
Yeah. Here's the platform you're talking about, I think, isn't it?
It's I want to know the story of that prop specifically, because I think that whole production, designing that must have been a really interesting thing in itself.
So there's a level of detail here so he has an eye for detail in this movie that is very, very particular, but yet there is a sprawl to the movie. And that's a screenplay thing too. But since it's the same guy, I think it needs to be considered.
Yeah.
That seems like not a mistake, but not as well thought out. It almost seems like it needed a sharper focus. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, he bit off more than he could chew. I mean, I think he really wanted to pay due to the epicness of the story to begin with, to the idea of who he's working with, or the characters he's working with. And it was just too much. It was just too much for any person to really wrangle.
And I want to tie Cleopatra historically to modern times to some degree, because I think that at the time, throughout the 50s, up to this point, because Cleopatra killed the epic. You know what I mean? And it burst the bubble. We talk about the superhero bubble all the time on our Sound Off and on the show. Davey feels like he needs monthly reports on it. At this time, these epic movies were the big summer movies of the year. Or in this case, they probably came out in December each year. They were the big movies each year that everybody was looking forward to. The Ben-Hurs that came out 4 years earlier, the Ten Commandments that came out in '56. And these movies, they bust them out every year, and every year they break box office records. The Robe with Richard Burton in 1953. There's tons of examples, El Cid and so forth and so on. And I think Cleopatra, there's a timing issue that first of all, it's a male. These are boys and men going to see these epics. So now it's a female-centered epic, for one. Spartacus is another great example, by the way, 1960. So it's a female-centered epic, which maybe didn't appeal as much to the boys, all the love and so forth and so on that's involved, the melodrama. But also, I mean, I think there's a fatigue. The fatigue finally hit, and again, it made a lot of money, just not enough to cover its costs. So there's an unfortunate timing thing as far as Cleopatra is concerned from an historical perspective. I mean, like,
what was the date it was actually released again?
The exact date I don't know. I mean, like, I assume late in the year, in 1963.
Because I mean, 63 is also a interesting year in terms of history. So it feels like maybe audiences were just not necessarily ready.
Are you talking about the JFK?
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking, maybe Davy Joe can look it up, the exact release date of Cleopatra, because he's got nothing better to do. Right?
It's a December release.
What's that?
What am I supposed to be looking up?
The release date of Cleopatra.
Cleopatra, yeah. I mean, if it was a December release.
So the other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about while he does that is, do you feel like he had a certain perspective on this movie? Were there themes beyond the plot?
The whole movie is an analogy for how opulence and excess can be a downfall, certainly.
Right, which is not necessarily like a new story.
No, and also it's kind of, I mean, it's ironic considering how we're framing the movie in terms of how it works in cinema history.
Yeah.
The opulence was its downfall ultimately.
I mean, you're saying from a John F. Kennedy point of view?
No, I'm saying in terms of like how much money they spent on it and how they.
Oh, yeah, in terms of the movie studio itself.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I kept thinking about, back in December, the rampant sexuality, like the way that, and I don't, maybe it was about box office and bosom and Liz Taylor, as you alluded to earlier, but I think also, I mean, like, I'm wondering if there's something about the growing interest in sexuality in the 60s here. Like, I wonder, not that people didn't care about sexuality before that, but like, I felt like they were really pushing envelopes.
Yeah,
especially with some of these outfits. Like, dear God, look at her here.
I know. I mean, there were a couple times when I was surprised that it squeaked by code. I mean, at that point, I mean there were some scenes where they were really seemed like they were really pushing it.
And I'm surprised Elizabeth Taylor was like on board with all this stuff.
Yeah. But I mean,
Davy Joe, do you have a release date for us?
June 12th for the U.S. and July 31st for the UK.
Okay, so pre.
So it was a summer movie and before the assassination.
All right. She's down that theory.
So what were you saying about the sexuality, my man?
Just it was surprisingly on the nose, I guess, for this kind of movie. I mean, they really didn't try to hide anything. They really were, I think, promoting, her. They would argue, I'm sure, her beauty and because of her sort of power, but also,
and how she used her sexuality to manipulate.
Yeah, but ultimately, it really came down to having like lots of really incredibly low-cut dresses, or her being barely clothed. I mean, it was just kind of surprising, I guess, in a way, that it was handled so obviously. I guess I would have expected them to be a little bit more subtle about it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to complain necessarily.
I think there was pushing the envelope, but I also think it was, I do feel like in the society at the time there was a sexual awakening happening or starting to, and I'm wondering if they were suggesting this, the way that Cleopatra uses her sexuality is almost modern for a woman, or could be, like she was frequently in control of situations because of the way she utilized her sexuality. Perhaps am I talking junk? Am I onto something here?
No, I mean, even the fact that this movie was Cleopatra, it wasn't Caesar, it wasn't Mark Antony, it was Cleopatra. Right. It put her.
How do you guys feel about this James Cameron Angelina Jolie remake concept?
There's a James Cameron Angelina what? They remade this? When was that?
They did not. They are in discussions.
Really? I don't know about that.
I really hope that doesn't happen.
Why?
I just can't imagine enjoying that. I just can't.
They'd only make it 3 hours, not 4.
It doesn't. It's. I mean, I'm fine with a long movie if it's good. I just don't want to see Desert Titanic. And I feel
okay, all right. But what about the sexuality thing before I get onto the bracket?
I mean, I think that's a good point. I think that's probably what they were pushing, and sure. No, and don't forget my question. I have a question for you.
There's a lot to say about
that. He's got a question. All right,
but
give it to me. Now's the time.
There's a lot to say about that, though. There's a lot to say about how there is a feminist quality to this movie in a sense. I mean, they're talking about female empowerment through her own sexuality, and it's probably something that's relatively foreign to movie audiences at that point. So it's interesting.
Yeah, completely agree. Davy Joe, your question.
It's a direction question. The way that they shot the murder of Julius Caesar, we got the overlay of Cleopatra's face during that shot. You're like seeing her expression and faded over top of the murder.
It was it was 8 months ago now that I saw it, so it's a slow dissolve.
Yeah,
it dissolved into a scene with Cleopatra.
I hated that. I mean, I just thought it was.
But did you get what was going on, Davy Joe?
Yeah, no, I get it, but it's such a.
It's over the top.
Yeah, it is, and it's such a big deal, like.
Yeah, but I mean, ultimately, you got that she was seeing visions from an oracle, right?
Yes, I think she had premonitions. Yes.
Well, I'll agree with Davy Joe. Just narratively, all the sort of Egyptian spiritual stuff felt a little out of place, given a lot of the other political intrigue that was going on. I mean, like it does feel not as grounded as some of the other stuff. And that I think is the start of the turn that it makes when and that's shortly after the trip to Rome and everything. And that's where the movie starts to go downhill for me. But so maybe it's that element of spirituality to this otherwise pretty grounded, like she's a pretty savvy woman, and that feels like something that she, given the rest of her character, she wouldn't be into. Is that maybe what you're responding to?
Well, that's a really good point. That's not really what I was talking about, but I like. I
made
like
a really good point, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it there.
I just think that scene is
cheesy.
An opportunity to have some real drama, and it just kind of comes off as sort of glossed over and cheesed. I hated that. I just hated it a lot.
So there wasn't really a question there. It sounds like it was more like it was more like a statement.
I wanted someone to defend it, and I guess J Money did.
Well, I don't know. I think it was over the top as well. I just want to be clear that you understand she was watching a vision, and that's why she was superimposed over it, as opposed to,
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's not how it went down. That's just how she saw it. But
yeah, that's kind of, I think, what they were implying, is that she was almost creating the story as opposed to watching real events.
And also potentially, suggesting that her influence over him is one of the things that led to his disfavor in the Senate.
Sure.
No?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
It's funny, as I was watching that scene.
Blank faces.
No, that's true. While I was watching that scene, also came to mind. I mean, it's something that's been played out a lot. I think we've seen that scene repeated, frequently, and just in terms of the idea of it, but very frequently. The end of season 5 of Game of Thrones almost mirrors the whole sequence perfectly. So I think it's something that's become iconic anyway. One way or the other.
I'm only on season 2. Slow your roll.
I'm not going to tell you what happens then, but yeah. Everybody dies, baby. Everybody dies.
He's an asshole, ladies and gentlemen. I will. It does make me wonder. Davy's random comment makes me wonder, though, that maybe one thing that maybe they should have done is limited the perspective a little bit of this movie, instead of being with all these 3 characters at all different times. Maybe just sticking with Cleopatra. Like seeing things through her eyes a little bit more.
Yeah.
Maybe that would have, brought down the pomp and circumstance factor a little bit, but maybe it would have kept us a little more focused. I don't know, just something to think about.
No, it's good. It's a good point.
Yeah.
That's two. Two in this episode, kids. Which it brings us to the brackets, and we're running late with the brackets. Unbelievable. We talked about Cleopatra longer than I thought.
Yeah.
So the brackets are our little showdown. The classic. This is not what I'm supposed to do first. I was so excited for Davey to read the rules that I forgot the graphic that I'm supposed to show first.
For Christ's sake.
What?
Nothing. Go for it. Go for it.
I can't. Oh, there it is. So here we go. It's time for the classic movie showdown. Random sounds out of my voice. Okay. So now that brings us to the rules, and now if you would like to see bad acting, now is your opportunity. Davy Joe, you ready?
Yep.
All right. Davy Joe will explain the brackets to you.
All right. The seating criteria varies from bracket to bracket. Films are shown at JB-hosted screenings, and they need to be 15 years or older. Voters are eligible if they see both films within a 12-month period. Voters must see both films in JB's presence, and JB is ineligible to vote unless the vote counts. He can break ties.
All right, there you go. If only we had Rex Harrison and Roddy McDowell here to read those rules instead, and then things might be a little bit different. So basically, it's like the NCAA tournament, same idea, except with movies. And tonight's bracket is going to be the 60s bracket, and Cleopatra, I think, is a 9 seed, and it goes up against The Longest Day from 1962, which is a all-star cast movie that tells the story of D-Day, and it played on TCM over Memorial Day weekend. Did you guys manage to watch that one as well, by chance?
I did.
Dave, did you make a drinking game out of that one?
I actually watched them back to back because I'm a masochist. So The Longest Day was my way to sober up.
You were sobered up for that one. Well, that's impressive back to back. That's a commitment. You took a day off.
I did
for sure. And so, Davy Joe, did you? This seems like a movie that you would want to watch, Davy Joe.
I've seen it before. I did not watch it again. I have seen it before.
How long ago?
It's been a few years.
It's been a few years. So, did you like it when you first saw it?
Yeah, I remember. Like, I don't think it's not a movie that I count as like a great classic film, but I do like it.
Real quick, what was your impression of it, J Money?
It's funny. I started really strong with it. I really liked the build-up in the movie. I really like kind of probably the first act in general. But at the end of it, I sort of petered out a little bit, and maybe that's because I just had a long day of movie watching. Or maybe
you literally had the longest day.
The longest day of movie watching. Maybe that's because I kind of knew how it was going to end because history.
Now, in fairness, ladies and gentlemen, the reason that we scheduled these classics for tonight is because we knew we would have a full month in between shows to watch it. So the fact that he watched them on the same day is his own problem.
Absolutely true.
And the fact that Davey didn't watch it at all is kind of pathetic.
Well, Davy Joe was traveling, and I procrastinate like shit. So that's pretty much our two excuses for the most part.
All right. So you petered out.
Well, I guess what I would say is that I feel like the movie itself petered out a little bit. No?
Okay. I'm curious to ask why you think that.
Are you asking me right now, or are you just curious about it?
Yeah. I'm taking the bite.
Okay. I think that ultimately it's there's so much wonderful build up in the beginning of this, and there's so much like anticipation about what's going to happen. The actual battle itself was not necessarily that compelling. I think there's a lot of really interesting characters that they introduced. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas in the story about how they're going to approach this. I really like the back and forth that they show between the Allies and the Axis side. I thought that was actually a really fascinating take on it. But ultimately, it all sort of devolves into this kind of I don't want to say rote, but I think by the end of it, the action sequences felt kind of hollow to me. I think they ended up feeling kind of just very standard and played out. So
Rote is your adjective for the day, it seems. Did you
Did I
just
say that
discover
right?
that word?
rote. Rote. Very rote. I don't know if it's
words of the day with J Money, ladies and gentlemen.
Look, I don't know if it's because at this time they couldn't necessarily, like, obviously it's a very bloody, violent conflict. It doesn't necessarily translate in terms of how they shot this movie. You know, and I'm aware of that more as a modern audience than I'm sure that people were when it was released. So it's maybe there's a disconnect for me from that point of view. But ultimately, the way it kind of rounded out as the invasion ends it just felt kind of boring, I guess, in a way. It felt kind of played out to me. So I think a lot of it was in the intrigue ahead of time as it was leading up to the actual. Maybe we should talk about the plot, but basically it's about the day of storming Normandy. It's about the day that they land on the beaches there. That whole process of watching them get ready and leading up to it was fascinating. The actual battle scenes themselves, they're okay. They were not necessarily the most.
I also got frustrated by the, by the parade of stars.
That is absolutely true.
And it definitely left me cold from a point of view, certainly pop stars like Fabian and Frankie Avalon or whatever, you know what I mean? Shoehorning him in there. Yeah. Shoehorning is my verb of the day, apparently. I think that's my third time. But forcing these guys in there in this movie in such a way that, it doesn't feel like it's really telling the story. It just feels like they're not playing characters. It just felt awkward and stilted. Right. And there's another movie that's based on a book by the same author called A Bridge Too Far from 1976, I want to say.
I actually like A Bridge Too Far. I like A Bridge Too Far better than this movie, for instance. So.
I definitely like A Bridge Too Far better than this movie, but it has the same issue. It's like, oh, now Robert Redford shows up. You know what I mean? It's one of those, it's the same ideas. So anyway, all right.
I will say that this paired well with Cleopatra because there's a couple stars from Cleopatra that also pop up in this movie, and it's kind of funny to see them back to back in that scenario.
Richard Burton,
and also Roddy, what's his face?
Roddy McDowall. That's right. Yeah. All right. So who gets to vote first? Well, I'm gonna go. I was gonna give Jay Money first, but I think his vote is gonna be clearer. So I'm gonna save the surprise and let Davey vote first.
The Longest Day.
Longest Day. And do you want to say why?
It's really because Cleopatra is terrible, and it's not as terrible, but it's the Longest Day. I think maybe part of what you don't like about it is something that I did like. I was like, oh, there's that guy, and I don't consider either of these to be great films. So I enjoy The Longest Day, and it's kind of a patriotic thing. It's feel good. It's a feel good movie to me, even though it's kind of emotionally draining at times.
I mean, it's not feel good if you're a Nazi. Think about that one.
Right. No, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Not what I expected. Jay Money, you're the wild card here.
Yeah. I really went back and forth on this a lot because I certainly initially went into. I guess I thought I knew what I thought about halfway through my experience, and then I kind of went back and forth. Ultimately, I'm going to go with Cleopatra on this, and I want to echo Davy Joe in that I don't think either movie is really stellar, but I think that Cleopatra earns it in the end, almost in terms of its endurance and its production values and everything else, because I think it's a feat that's worth noting. In terms of cinematic history, it's probably more important to me in general, and also I just think that there's more to take away from it. The Longest Day, it kind of felt, to Davy Joe's point, kind of like a patriotic puff piece. It felt like kind of a hollow telling of that day. So
that's accurate. Yes.
Do you have a rebuttal, Davy?
No. He's right on the money. Patriotic puff piece is a good way of putting it.
But he chose Cleopatra.
I mean, he's wrong, clearly. But I mean, Cleopatra is a sentence. It's something you do to punish somebody. It's I honestly I was so mad at you.
What if Cleopatra went up against Oklahoma?
What's that?
Oof. What if Cleopatra went up?
I'll watch Oklahoma 10 times out of 10.
Wow.
This is done. I'm not ever doing this again.
Wow. All right. for what it's worth, I would also, my vote doesn't count, I would also have voted for Cleopatra.
Yeah.
Over the longest day for a lot of reasons that you talked about, and the first half of it as strength. I mean, I was fully engaged in the first half of it, and longest day I was never fully engaged as much. And again, Rex Harrison is a big plus for me as well. And in terms now, none of our votes counted overall in the brackets. That was determined in December at that screening, and it was a mostly female audience that participated at this screening. So you can figure what won. The winner was, of course, The Longest Day. Davy Joe not even paying attention. The Longest Day defeated Cleopatra, even though it was a predominantly female screening.
I mean, even they couldn't take it.
What's that?
Even they couldn't take it, I guess.
Well, I mean, yeah, they sat through all Longest Day, and I did feel like restlessness during Cleopatra, and I don't know, maybe just like the manliness of Richard Burton and John Wayne led to them liking Longest Day more. Who knows? It's I can't explain it well. Do you guys have reactions?
John Wayne in this movie was such a ridiculous sort of caricature. But I guess that's John Wayne. I don't even know why I said that. That's like saying the sky is blue. I understand. I understand why people. I mean, it's much easier to like The Longest Day, I think. And I don't want to sound like I'm snarkily putting down people that voted for the movie. I think that it's just a little more. I mean, there's certainly it certainly moves quicker. Let's put it that way. There's more going on. So.
Oh God, a snail crawling through quicksand is going to move quicker than that monstrosity.
So I think we finally figured how Davey really feels about Cleopatra.
Yeah, I guess I was pretty unclear up until now. But.
Yeah. So we finally, got a sense of it now. All right, so I think I'm going to move on, kids. How do you feel?
Yeah, that's good.
We're going to wrap things up and go to the sound off. All right, so in talking about the sound off's coming up next, I'll talk about that in a second. But our next classic on August 18th, Thursday, August 18th, and it'll be at 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific. Our next classic is a movie that gets its title from one of the most famous lines of dialogue in movie history. Also, for the sound off, I'm going to talk about one of our 1990 film that we didn't get to talk about during our 1990 in review. I'm going to do my top 5 British indies, and Davey's got a new segment that we'll find out about because it's somewhat mysterious even to me. So, and that's going to close out the evening. So our freeform segment, sound off, and maybe we'll talk about this horror film I'm working on now. Maybe we won't. That's coming up very soon, 4 to 6 minutes, let's say. Sound off, freeform segment coming up next. This has been a Cleopatra discussion. See you later.